I looked for lots of ways of avoiding making a film for a number of years. And the best way of avoiding making a film was to make other things like TV commercials, stuff that actually, I couldn't believe it when somebody paid me to make something, so that was a kind of shock.
You mentioned the fear involved in the work. I don't think that ever really goes away, though, not even with success,
No.
what other people can judge as success.
No, so in 4 weeks' time I start another film in London. And it's my 6th film, and I've made a lot of, that's a good number of movies to make, and they've all mostly been pretty well received by critics, and the last one, was officially a success. But I am as freaked out, as scared, as uncertain as I imagine making this film as I was with that.
Now, that word you used, officially a success, because you're trying to weigh two different things. One is to achieve an official commercial success, maybe even a Hollywood kind of success. The other thing is you're making judgments yourself about the kind of film you'd like to be making.
Yeah.
And this is, if I can add a little, this is a little more complicated if you're a filmmaker than if you're a writer, because filmmaking involved so many other people and their money.
Yeah, so if you're a writer, you can, even if nobody's reading your work, you can still work. I mean, you can practice your craft, you can write stories and develop your technique and all of those things. And it once you can support yourself, that's possible. But making films is expensive, and also massively time-consuming and labor-intensive. So you need lots of people to support you, and so you are immediately part of a bigger industrial reality. And if you're like me and you have that complex thing where you both want success but you also don't trust it, it's very hard to work in that space, because there is lots of temptation. There are lots of people, if you're good at it, and again in quotes, there are people who will want you to make commercial choices, and at the same time, and nothing, and the artistic impulse is a very complex one. So in the other direction, there is uncertainty and self-doubt and all of the things that come with that sort of work. So, it's a very easy place to get lost in, I think.
Okay. You were saying to me a little earlier, ideally, as you make more films, you'd like to make them more, for them to be much more your own project, to kind of get off the treadmill of making the next film and have really time to concentrate on something that's really authentically yours in terms of personal experience. In all the films you've done until now, there have been various degrees of collaboration with writers, with script writers.
But mostly with writers,
And that's been a constant experiment. Would you like to say something about that?
I mean, I like the experience. And I'm not complaining about what I'm doing. I'm incredibly lucky to work with people of great ability, and I think go very deeply into the things that we are making films about. And what I've learned is, I've learned a lot about that process of collaboration. And film, no matter, in fact, interestingly, so just to talk about collaboration, film is, even if you write every word, even if the idea is entirely generated from a personal experience, think of the most personal film project you can imagine. Sooner or later, you start to work with actors, cinematographers, designers, and particularly for me with the actors, it can never be good if the director is like some kind of crazy dictator who says, okay, this is exactly what you have to do. Because what happens is the actor then is really like a puppet. I mean, like a marionette. And for me, the experience of collaboration with an actor is seeing things that I did not put in there.
And to bring it back to Adam and Paul, the film you've all just seen, a big part of that film was your collaboration with Mark O'Halloran, who was also the starring actor, the taller guy. He made the script with you. It was a collaboration.
Yeah.
And he is a stage actor primarily,
yes.
Isn't he?
Yeah. He hadn't acted in film before, I think, before this, and he had written a little, but that was a really great experience of collaboration.
He seems very in control, as an actor.
Yeah.
You can.
No, he is, and in fact, the story with Adam and Paul is that up until 6 weeks before we shot, it was a different actor playing that part. And Mark was just the writer, or say just the writer, but he was the writer. And we had Tom, who plays the little guy, and then another actor who was playing his part. And through some crazy argument about money, which is always the argument, it's always about money, in most parts of life, this actor said, right, that's it, I'm gone.
And he's sorry now.
I hope he is. I think he might be. And I certainly never cast him again. And Mark, we didn't know what we would do. We thought, well, we went through a whole series of really big kind of searches, and eventually we decided that Mark could do it, because Mark, as a person, is very gentle. In fact, he's much more like the little guy. And he's not at all like the character he plays. But in the end, it was a great collaboration, and he was able to stop being the writer on set and just be the actor. He sort of stepped back.
Sorry, I just remembered you had Jan Karamitru
yes.
played in that. Where did you find him?
So Jan Karamitru,
in Bulgaria, of course.
Yeah, in Jan Karamitru. We had this character of this Bulgarian guy, right?
Sorry.
Yeah, and we were thinking about who we could get to play him, and then somebody said to me, there's a famous Romanian actor called Jan Karamitru, who was acting in the Gate Theatre in Dublin, which is Dublin's most famous theatre. And we said, look, he will understand, I mean, he can, he'll be able to do it, but do we dare to send him this script with all this stuff about Romanians in it? We thought he would burn the script, but he loved it, and he was such a great person on set. I mean, he's amazing. But so the joke of having a Bulgarian character complaining about Romanians, who is in fact not only Romanian, but I think he had been Romanian Minister for Culture. Am I right?
Yeah, in the early 90s, wasn't he? No, I think it was around 96. Would have been after that, no? Yeah.
Well, it's because...
under Constantinescu, that would have been 96 or 7.
After the... Yeah. I remember, though, because this came from the fact that myself and Mark, we always used to joke about this thing in Ireland where Irish people would pick one nationality, and every foreigner was that nationality. So for a while it was Bosnians, because there were some Bosnian refugees. And I remember loads of people in Dublin saying, I'm sick of all the Bosnians. And there were probably only about 200 Bosnians, but as far as they were concerned, everybody was Bosnian. So I think somebody that Mark knew, everybody was Romanian. And so we,
I'm just wondering now, before the film was made, were you not just a little bit nervous about how a comedy about junkies would go down?
Yeah.
Or there must have been some negative reactions. It's
generally
slightly...
remarkably few. But before we started, there was a feeling, I remember the first day of the shoot, the first thing we shot was the scene with the disabled kid, the kid with Down syndrome. And it was 7 o'clock in the morning, and we started, and Mark and I looked at each other, and I think we just said, if this is not good, you know, it's going to be such a disaster. We will be killed. But there was a sort of, there was that feeling, and I think it's something people talk about now in regards to all sorts of projects, about who has the right to tell what stories, you know. So you have like middle-class kids like Mark and myself who were making a film about working-class people whose lives were very different to ours. But I think we did it with a certain amount of tenderness towards the characters, and it is not a kind of critique of their lives in any way. And very amazingly, a lot of addicts became big fans of the film. So you will know this cinema. There's a cinema on Parnell Street in Dublin, which has been there for like 20 or 30 years. It was in the part of Dublin where the film is set, and the film ran for over 3 months there, and a lot of the audience were local, you know, users and ex-users. And
okay, moving on to your most recent film, Room. That was originally a novel written by Emma O'Donoghue, an Irish writer who lives in Canada. And you worked on the script of Room with her. It was another co-production, this time with a writer. Would you like to say something about that? Was that very difficult? I asked that because yesterday Cesar Paul Badescu was talking about working with a director on the script of his book, which is just coming out, and the process. He felt it was just being like a tailor. It was the director says, I want this, and he hands over the material, and the director tries to do. Well, is it a little bit like that with you and Emma O'Donoghue?
It's a little bit like that. The really good thing about Emma was that she's a very easy person to be around, to work with. She's the rarest of things. She's a very happy writer. She's a really happy person, and she's the happiest creative person I've ever met. And so she's enthusiastic about things. She's not. She approaches things with a very kind of positive attitude. And it was her first screenplay. Mm-hmm. So and she was not defensive. She was very open to conversation. So we spent a long time sitting at her kitchen table, mm-hmm. talking about how the film would differ from the novel, structuring it. And I think...
Did you lift scenes directly from the novel, or was it a lot more distant?
There are places where the second half is quite different. The first half is quite similar. And I mean, the thing about a novel is that a novel is a sort of an immersive experience. You can, you can digress. There are different ways of working, different sorts of novels, but you can certainly. There is a sort of, you can move sideways, you can move backwards, you can stop, you can pause and look around. Films are this unfolding of action in time, and they're very different. And in the second half of Room, it was a kind of a long goodbye to the characters you met and really got to know in the first half. Okay. That can't work in a film. So, but I think the process of working with Emma was a slow handing over. So at the beginning, it was me coming to her and saying, I love your novel, I think I know how to make it into a film. Working with her. And then towards the very end, it was like the tailoring, which is going, can you cut these lines or make this scene longer? Or because then you're right into the manufacture of the film, and the shape of the film takes precedence.
And is the structure... The structure of the film, is that something that is very clear from you before you start filming, or is there a certain amount that happens in the process of editing where the film can actually be changed, or you decide you just don't like something, you cut it, or...
Definitely. I mean...
Do you allow, as you film, that kind of latitude to throw stuff away?
It's the same thing as I said about actors, at least for me. And I know Michael Haneke, I saw him speak, and he said, somebody asked him that very question, do things change? And he said in his very Germanic way, no, I write the film, I draw the storyboard, I shoot the storyboard, I edit the storyboard. And I think that's great. I mean, but for me, there's a sterility there if you're not responding to what's happening. I always have an extremely strong impulse at the beginning, otherwise I couldn't make it. And that impulse does have it has key scenes, mood, kind of territory, and sometimes a strong structural idea, usually a pretty strong structural idea, but something always changes. And particularly in the edit, I always remove quite a bit of material, because I think we tend to overwrite and overshoot films, and then when you see them in the edit suite, you go, it's present, this idea is present, it doesn't need to be restated, and then you can take things out and throw them away.
All right, I'm sure somebody else has questions, so I'm gonna open it up now.
Are you familiar with Romanian movies? Or do you have one in particular that you like? And do you think that the communism theme in our movies is something holding it back?
So I have watched quite a number of Romanian movies because Romanian filmmakers became very important. You know, I'm trying to think when that burst of films happened, but so my favorite Romanian film is The Death of Mr. Lazarescu, the Cristi Puiu film. I know He's Coming Tomorrow. I saw that film when it came out and was really affected by it. But then I've watched Monju's films and Porumbiu. Apologies for the name, for the violence that I'm doing to the Romanian language. I think there's a kind of very like that. Whether there is I think those directors are all very different. There is a kind of authenticity to all of them, or a commitment to sort of a kind of naturalism, but also something else. I've been interested. I mean, I'm interested as somebody who grew up in a very different culture. I'm interested in the world that they reflect, the world of communist Romania that some of those filmmakers have reflected on. But it seems to me that the more recent films haven't maybe been as focused on that. So I tell you what, if the work is that good, then I'm very happy for it to be about whatever those filmmakers want it to be about. It's been some of the best work I've seen in 10 years. It's a good question. What did I think when I shot it? We made it there was an American partner already involved, but a small distributor, so no big studio. I thought that the film would be, I think when I started shooting it, I recognized that the performances and that what we were getting with those actors was really, really very unusually good, and that there was a kind of intensity there. And because maybe, and this goes back to what Philip asked me earlier on, because it's such a kind of we would call it like a high concept story, you know, you can talk about the film. It's a mother and son trapped in a room. That is the sort of thing that journalists like to talk about, so you know that there is a chance that it will be spoken about. But I don't think we could have predicted, we did not predict ever that it would have the success that it did. That was really kind of shocking to us. And I had to, you know, I spent 6 months just traveling to promote the film. No other work, not seeing the family kind of thing. So that was not expected. Well, so the start of Adam and Paul is with Mark O'Halloran, the tall guy. He lived on Parnell Street, the same street that I mentioned, and he saw these pairs of these, often two guys, or a guy and a girl, walking with no particular purpose. And he thought this was extraordinary. He came from the countryside, and so he'd never seen this kind of slow motion life, as we called it, you know, life sort of slowly moving through the streets. And when I met Mark and he showed me some scenes he'd been writing about these two characters, Adam and Paul, I think what excited me was it was a contemporary story about the city that I lived in, but also I'm a huge fan of vaudeville, of like Laurel and Hardy and Chaplin and Buster Keaton. And I think you asked me about what do you know, how clear is the structure? What I had was just this vivid feeling for the tone, this strange mix-up of Beckett and Laurel and Hardy and a kind of circular story about people in search of a kind of purpose that they can't find. And that was the thing that drove me. It was, but also just the sheer pleasure of the voices of, you know, because it's not really. People said, "Oh, it's like Ken Loach or something," but it's not at all. It's a fantasy. It's a sort of fairy tale, really, hidden under the surface of something that looks very real because it's dirty, but it's actually highly stylized, really, and I think that's what really excited me as a maker of things.
Two questions. I was wondering whether your experience as a film director altered the way you read books, and the second was what do you like most in a book? What is that special something that makes you want to turn the book into a film?
The first thing is, yes, unfortunately, I think being a filmmaker at this point, it goes back to another question Philip asked about the personal quest for meaningful work against the industry. But the industry views books, novels, as just the quickest road, the quickest route to a movie is by finding a really good novel. And because of that, I get sent novels all the time. And in fact, within with the people that I work with, who are very close to me, but big part of what happens in the office is that people read novels. In fact, we see novels before they're published, and quite often the film rights for novels are sold before they're even published. And the problem is that if I read something now, I'm so used to reading for the screen that it's extremely difficult. So sometimes I choose, for my own kind of nourishment, to read books that I absolutely know I would never be able to be transformed into films. And then what do I look for? For me, it's a kind of, it's a flavor. I always go back to that word, you know, it's a tone, a flavor, a territory that I find exciting. So the book, well, I'll talk about something else. The book I'm about to make into a film is a book called The Little Stranger by an English writer, Sarah Waters. And actually, Park Chan-wook just made, I think that's it, I'm very bad on names, he just made The Handmaiden, and that's based on another one of her novels. He's transposed it into Korea, and it's changed a lot, but it's still the same story. So this film that I'm about to make is a kind of ghost story in the tradition of Henry James, like The Turning of the Screw, so it's a very literary ghost story. But when I read it, I just found myself extremely fascinated by it at the level of texture and ideas, and it stayed with me. And I read it 8 years ago, and it took me all of that time to be able to make it. And of course, now that I'm 4 weeks away from making it, I think I've made the biggest mistake of my life, which of course I feel about every film as I'm about to make it. But no, this is there was just something about the world and something. I tell you what it is. It's never an idea. It's always something which I find hard to grasp, because if I completely understand it, then I don't have anything to discover. There always has to be some central quality that I really want to understand, and that's what I want to do when I make the film.
Many movie adaptations of novels use voiceover, and for Romanian directors, using voiceover is something, I don't know, something yucky.
Yes.
Me, as a spectator, I like very much voiceover. I like voiceover in English Patient, for instance, or in Forrest Gump, or in Amarcord. You mentioned Fellini.
Yeah.
What do you think about voiceover? It is obsolete or not?
No, it's not obsolete. And as soon as I hear a rule like that, you know, people say, oh, flashbacks, voiceover, there's a kind of snobbery about those things. But if you think about Jules et Jim, the Truffaut film, or Barry Lyndon, which is one of my absolute favorite films, there is the use of voiceover as a way of concentrating the viewer's attention. It does something, it does transform the image. I mean, if you're looking at something without voiceover, there's an immediate encounter. But if you put voiceover, you sort of read the image differently. It becomes, I love story theatre, for example, you know, where a narrator stands out and the actors kind of act out what he's saying. So I think it just, you know, you have to understand what it does. But no technique is in itself good or bad. So I used a very small amount of voiceover, very, very small, in room, because it was important to locate the film with the boy. And there are maybe 6 or 8 lines of voiceover in the film I'm about to make. So very small use of it, but I think it's totally valid. It's like in cinematography, for a long time people thought, oh, zooms were, you know, cheesy. You only zoom in Dallas when you're, you know, looking up at the building and you zoom in on JR's window or something. But that's silly. I mean, that's like saying there's a certain word that shouldn't appear in a novel. It just always depends on how it's used.
It's just more of a personal curiosity, because I found it very fascinating how you use music in this movie that we have just seen. I was wondering what's your relationship with that? How important is it for you to? Because here I found it almost that it had kind of an editing function.
Yes.
It was guiding us somehow.
Yes. Exactly. So in this film, it's not used to underscore the emotions within a scene. It's used to link and to remind you of ideas and to sort of relate back to other parts of the film. It's more thematic than, you know, underscore. In the second film I made, there's almost no music, just one piece of music. And that was right for that film, but I think a lot about it, and I've worked with the same composer. We've been friends since we were 9 years old, so this is this other person that I've known for a long time. We were in primary school together, and so he's composed everything that I've done, and I've worked really closely with him. And I listen to music when I'm working, I listen to music when I'm writing or planning shots or thinking about projects. So I usually build up a sort of a list of pieces that become important to me for that film, but they're never right. They're always useful for me, but they never seem to live on screen. Then we end up doing something very different. But yeah, I mean, I think Stephen, he created a beautiful sense of a kind of a sort of village band, or of a, you know, the instruments are not perfectly in tune. There's a lazy, sad folk quality to the music in Adam and Paul, which felt it did something very, very important in the film.
And with that, Lenny, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Philip. Thanks, everybody.